A lot of people might not know this, but I love horror games. There's nothing more exhilarating than immersing yourself in some haunted setting where you're forced to fight your fears and survive. I've always loved the different ways that each game raises your sense of fear, but in particular, I've always been interested in horror sound design and by extension, soundtracks. Part of me has always wanted to create a soundtrack to a horror game or horror film because, in my opinion, the genre allows composers to get away with a lot. You get to experiment to your heart's content, coming up with a variety of unique and interesting sounds and melodies to be used in unsettling contexts, all in an effort to make players more scared. It's always seemed like a lot of fun to me being a musician and all, so it got me thinking, why don't I just create my own horror soundtrack? And today, we're gonna do just that. I'm gonna record 3 short tracks that correspond with the game that they are inspired by. An atmospheric soundtrack akin to something you might hear wandering around Fatal Frame, a perhaps more conventional soundtrack for something like classic Resident Evil, and lastly, an industrial noise soundtrack that would fit well in the world of Silent Hill. So for this track, I wanted to use a demo that I've had for a very long time and expand upon it. Take a listen. Revisiting this demo a few months ago reignited my interest to make a horror type soundtrack, so I figured I had to include it. Of course, since what you just heard was a demo I recorded on my phone, I had to re-record it in much better quality for the basis of this song. I started off by tuning my guitar to C# standard. Why C# standard, you might ask? Well, if it was good enough for Tony Iommi, then it's good enough for me. After that, I further tuned the low C# down an additional step and a half to B flat. Why did I do this, you might ask? I don't know. It just felt right. The main part is played on harmonics on the 5th and 7th frets, and while they ring out, I quickly use the tuning peg to detune and then retune the low B flat. After I recorded about a minute or so of that, I picked the best few passes in a row and looped it, mainly because I'm too lazy to play it perfect and I just wanted it to sound good. Some people might be wondering if I set the project file to be in the right tempo and key, which I did not. I felt like if I quantized everything so it lined up perfectly, that would somewhat ruin the effect of spontaneity and unease, so I'm relying on my own sense of time when adding additional parts. At the same time, when it came to more sound effects type parts, I just played in accordance with how I felt. Speaking of sound effects, another sound that I thought to add was strumming behind the bridge of the guitar because it produces a really cool bell-like effect. I always felt like this sound would be perfect in a horror soundtrack, and it turned out fine, but I felt like the pitch was too high, so I used the Digitech whammy set 1 octave down to lower the pitch and just layered it over the other take. I thought the track was coming along great at this point, which is of course where things started to get very not great. I started to add all these weird sounds like pick scrapes and pitch shifting stuff, but none of it sounded right to me. The main guitar part was giving me this really earthy vibe and sounded like a big rain drum, and some of the bell sounds reminded me of my old neighbor's wind chimes. So with this imaginary garden in mind, I decided to abandon my guitar and try to create some wind sounds with my mouth. All I did was breathe really slowly into my mic and then add on some reverb and tape delay, but I genuinely feel like it worked really well. Unlike all the other unused ideas I came up with, this breathing wind sound was very sterile and fulfilled my desire for a subtle, slowly creeping up on you type feeling, rather than just some random horror stinger tossed into the mix. For a final added touch, I added master reverb to give the track some space and an adaptive limiter to boost the track's volume by a considerable amount. As I listened to it, I could really start to imagine a level or a scene that takes place outside where our heroes are forced to venture into the darkness. So with that in mind, here's the final product accompanying Mio and Mayu Amakura as they traverse the abandoned Minakami village in Fatal Frame 2.
A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich. Really?
So I will admit this track turned out a bit differently than how I thought I was going to do it originally. The original plan was for me to just play some melodic, spooky sounding strings on my keyboard and call it a day, but instead I decided to challenge myself and only use sounds I could create using the guitar, seeing as it is my main instrument and all. I started off with some volume swells on a tritone chord, which sounded good, but I also felt like it was cheating since after I recorded it, it reminded me of a song from the Resident Evil 3 soundtrack called Feel the Tense, which is a song that plays when Nemesis is lurking around the area you're in. Regardless though, I decided I was still going to use it because I love tritones. Like with the atmospheric track, I had different ideas of what I wanted to lay on top to no avail before finally settling on this 4-note motif. I picked these notes because I wanted the track to stand out from the previous one and be slightly more melodic. The way I recorded this was I played the first 2 notes on one track and the last 2 on a separate track. That way each note could ring out to its fullest extent without me interrupting it by moving my fingers to a different fret. And like with the atmospheric track, I didn't quantize this project file either, so I just had to time it as best as I could. I make it sound like it was tedious, but it really wasn't that bad. After that, I was thinking that this track still needed something to give it more weight, so I looked around the room for inspiration when I laid eyes on my trusty old EBow. To be honest, I forget I even have this thing. I set my guitar flat on my lap and just let it drone out the root note while slowly bending the note by pushing down the whammy bar slot. Halfway through recording that, I decided I wanted to double track it, only instead bending the string upward by pushing down on the string behind the bridge, which is what I did. The reason I bended the notes is probably really obvious, but instead of just having an unwavering, unmoving note that just sits there, I wanted to subtly bend the string to create a bit of dissonance and therefore tension and unease. And we all know there's nothing more tense than a note that is just ever so slightly out of tune. To add a final touch, I decided to add one more EBow track but combine it with some fuzz and really dampen the tone to create a very sterile sounding boop that I volume swelled intermittently throughout the piece. I gotta tell you, on the occasions that I do use the EBow, this thing really does come in clutch. Like with the last track, I added reverb and a limiter for the final step. Overall, it sounded better than I thought it might turn out. I think probably the weakest part might be those obvious guitar high notes. I do think that maybe if they were played with a different tone or instrument, it would stick out less to my ears, but I still think it's good as is. I could see the song being used in a very claustrophobic area with tons of concrete, so here it is accompanying Jill Valentine as she makes her way through the lab in the remake of Resident Evil. This track was probably the easiest to make simply because it's just a bunch of noise, but that said, it did require some preparation. Going into the recording of this one, I had the idea to bang on some drums. I could have set up the project to quantize some digital drums, but I decided no, I want the satisfaction of beating them myself. So I did just that. I have this old PDP kit I got when I was in high school to practice for my brief stint in indoor percussion ensemble, so I took the floor tom from it and mic'd it up. I will say that this tom, and all the drums in this kit for that matter, are of a higher pitch than I'd like. I mean, look at this thing, it's not exactly huge. As a result, I have it tuned kinda low, which makes it sound kind of bad, but it'll do for my purposes. Since I have 2 microphones, I figured the more the merrier and went ahead and used them both. I mic'd the top of the head near the edge with an SM57 because that's how I was taught to do it, and stuck an SM58 at the bottom edge just to see how it would sound. Fun fact, the SM57 and 58 are both the same microphone, the only difference being the pop filter on the 58. If you have a 58 and you want to turn it into a 57, all you have to do is remove the pop filter, which is what I did before micing the bottom. After everything was set up, I went ahead and played this repeating rhythm I had in mind for the track. It It didn't sound too bad, but I was going for a beating on a metal trash can type sound, so I decided to add a hi-hat, adjusted loosely with a mic on top acting like an overhead, and a mic down below because why not? As you can see, this is probably not the most ideal hi-hat setup in most cases. My friend gave me this top symbol and it's actually supposed to be a hi-hat bottom, but the one I used for the bottom is one that came with the kit. Some no-name starter symbol that I would imagine was probably made from melted down Pepsi cans. Since I was going for the trash can sound though, it was perfect. After that, I went ahead and listened to our track so far, and I decided I didn't like it. The recording was fantastic, but I thought some of the pitches were too high, so I added some pitch shifters to lower it, which made it better. I also added a bit crusher to one of the tom tracks to give it some crunch, and I gotta be honest with you, I absolutely hate bit crusher and ring modulator effects. I think they all sound genuinely horrible. But that said, it actually succeeded in what I was trying to accomplish, so maybe my problem with them is just a problem with my lack of skill to properly dial them in. With the drum track out of the way, all that was left was to add some noise. I started off with some guitar noise made courtesy of the Big Muff Pi and Digitech Whammy, but I decided it wasn't very good. After a few takes, I impulsively unplugged the guitar while the Big Muff was still activated, and the noise it made while the cable was halfway inside the jack immediately sparked my interest, so I recorded just a whole take of that. To me, it sounded like an old, worn-out generator, perfect for this industrial track. After recording that, I decided to just do away with the guitar altogether and see what I would come up with. Instead of using the whammy to pitch shift down, I pitch shifted up and created this interesting feedback type sound. Layered in the mix more quietly, it almost sounded like a siren in the distance. I tried to add a few other pitch shifty things, but to me the track was essentially complete without them. The only other thing I did aside from the usual master, reverb, and limiter was add a noise gate for the siren effect. I suppose it's a bit counterintuitive to add a noise gate in an intentionally noisy track, but I felt like the still audible, non-siren parts of that recording were getting in the way of the other noises in the mix I wanted to be present. With the track complete, the only thing left to do is see how it fares as James Sunderland dukes it out with some nurses in Silent Hill 2. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how everything turned out, especially for a small project like this that was simply done in a few afternoons. If you're a horror game creator or filmmaker looking for someone to do your soundtrack work, I might be interested. Until then, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, please leave some feedback in the comments below. As always, you can support me on Patreon or Ko-Fi, as well as check out some of my original music on Apple Music, Spotify, Bandcamp, and right here on YouTube. Also, merch is on the way. I don't know when. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.